It is about 8 AM on the morning of the 23rd of January, 1483. Anselm Adornes, a member of that famous family from Bruges, is having breakfast in the guest hall of a Scottish monastery. A small army of men gathers outside, hell-bent on doing him harm. Wanting to protect the nuns, Anselm decides to step outside and reason with the men. A decision that will cost him his life. Pilgrim, merchant, humanist, knight, diplomat, Renaissance man, Anselm Adornes was many things, but what was a Flemish merchant doing in Scotland, and why was he murdered? Welcome to Medieval Madness. The rumblings of insurgents grow louder across the countryside as bells toll for vengeance. Framed for the death of the prince, you've been living in ignominy for years now. But recent events are changing that. Was it just a case of wrong time, wrong place, or was there more to it than that? Today's sponsor, Bellwright, is a single-player or co-op open-world medieval strategy survival sim game where you, as the player, are charged with picking up the pieces of your past and bringing justice to a broken nation. Become the Bellwright as you lead a rebellion against the corrupt sovereignty, uncovering the hidden truths about your family as you return to your homeland for answers. Built in Unreal Engine 5, this gorgeous, sprawling open world is where you'll work your way up from a tiny settlement to the acting leader of a full-fledged rebellion. Help villagers build your settlement and deal with threats to gain power and renown. You need to balance the demands of leadership in battle along with the morale of the villagers you protect, meaning you have to walk the tightrope of happiness versus harshness. Can you be an effective leader of men and a pillar of the community at the same time? Your recruits will help you build your strength to stand against the crown, so prove yourself to be the hero that your people need. Bellwright is out now in early access on Steam. Click the link in the description of this video for more information and get 10% off the early access game until the 11th of July. And now for today's video. Welcome to Medieval Madness. Bruges. Bruges had become the capital of the County of Flanders in 1089. Its location was perfect for the trade of the Hanseatic League, a medieval network of merchant guilds and towns in Central and Northern Europe. Already on the circuit of French and Flemish cloth fairs from the early 13th century, Bruges developed new forms of merchant commercialism by pooling knowledge and resources. Any excess goods from the woolen weaving industry, wool and cloth markets could be stored safely within the city walls under the watch of the Counts of Flanders. The merchants of Bruges connected with the wool manufacturing areas of England and Scotland, utilising their resources and labour. The first merchant fleet from the Republic of Genoa arrived in Bruges in 1277. Now the port had a trade link to the Mediterranean, opening up commercial and financial opportunities, and the money came flooding in. The Adornes. Traditionally, it was Epocino Adornes who was the founder of the Flemish branch of the family. He settled in Flanders after visiting Jerusalem in 1269, igniting a family devotion to the Holy Land and its sites. In 1427, two of Epocino's descendants, Pieter and Jacob, also made the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and Jacob was invested as a Knight of the Holy Sepulchre, an honour only bestowed on those pilgrims deemed worthy. It was a solemn ceremony of ancient chivalry. On their return to Bruges, the brothers were given permission by Pope Martin V to build a private church based at their family home, quote, "in honour and memory of the salvific passion of our Lord Jesus Christ and of his holy sepulchre, known under the name of Jerusalem," as a way of commemorating their pilgrimage. Anselm was born on the 8th of December 1424 into his influential and wealthy family. His father was Pieter II Adornes and his mother was Elizabeth Breda-Eeks. Although not much is known about his childhood, Anselm was just 19 years old when he married Margaretha van der Bank, the daughter of a patrician. Around this time, Anselm began to participate in chivalric jousting competitions. These games were organised by Bruges Company of the White Bear, and usually young men from established families took part. The games allowed the nobles and townspeople to come together and reap the commercial benefits of attracting visitors and trade to Bruges. Anselm then became attached to the court of Philip the Good, Duke of Burgundy. In 1468, Anselm organised the Tournament of the Golden Tree to celebrate the wedding of Charles the Bold, Duke of Burgundy, son of Philip, to Margaret of York. The couple's joyous entry into the city saw the bride ride in a golden litter drawn by white horses. This was followed by 10 days of festivities, including Anselm's theatrical jousting tournament. With torches decorating the canals, flowers adorning the bridges, artificial pelicans sitting in faux trees, and sculpted archers gushing free wine, it has been described as the most spectacular marriage ever to take place in Bruges. For Anselm, his high status in the city was sealed. The godparents of his children were illustrious figures such as Louis of Bruges, Earl of Winchester, the Medici banker Tommaso Portinari, and Abbot Jan Krab, as well as members of important Genoese families. Merchant. The Adornes were involved in international commerce, including the profitable trade of alum stone, a mineral found outside of Europe and imported from the Mediterranean. The stone was used in the process of cloth and wool manufacturing as a dye fixative. Anselm was also a mediator for transactions with the Genoese and Spanish merchants right up until his death. As well as heading the family business, Anselm followed in the footsteps of his father and uncle by being active in public office. He held key positions in Bruges such as guardian of the leper colony, city councillor, and treasurer. Humanist. Anselm was also a patron of the arts. From his association with Charles the Bold and the Brotherhood of Our Lady of the Dry Tree, he became interested in polyphonic religious music and provided the training of a lute player in 1472. A library begun by his father, Pieter, was kept at the church. He insisted that, quote, "All of our books, both Latin and Flemish, should be kept at the Jerusalem chapel on lecterns, so that any person might profit from them." Bibles, hagiographies, and theological texts were also kept alongside humanist works by classical authors such as Macrobius and Virgil, and geographical, anatomical, and astronomical writings. Anselm himself transcribed a copy of the Somnium Scipionius by Cicero. Diplomat. During the 1460s and 70s, Anselm accepted diplomatic missions from the Duke of Burgundy. Bruges was the major trading partner for the Scots, but in 1467 the Scottish Parliament barred using Bruges as the staple port. Anselm was sent to Scotland on a diplomatic mission along with 30 other men from the Burgundian court. It's not known why he was singled out by the teenage James III, King of the Scots, but Anselm was given special treatment and invited to his home. The negotiations were a success and the merchants returned in 1470. The Scottish king made Anselm a royal councillor, Lord of Corthoy, and Knight of the Order of the Unicorn, and he was awarded Scottish lands, houses in Edinburgh, and an income for his faithful service. Anselm also travelled to Poland to the court of King Casimir IV in the name of the Duke of Burgundy, where he received a letter of safe conduct to the Shah Persia, Yusun Hassan. The Duke wanted to persuade the Shah to participate in a military campaign against the Ottomans. Anselm was chosen because of his familiarity with Muslim territories following his pilgrimage to Jerusalem. He also negotiated for the return of Tommaso Portinari's galley, the St. Matthew, when it was hijacked by the privateer Paul Benwick in the North Sea. After the death of Charles the Bold in 1477, there were riots in Bruges. Mary of Burgundy, Charles' only child, appointed Anselm and several other senior bigwigs with the task of finding a peaceful solution. The people were unhappy with the way that the council was being run, and the men were arrested on suspicion of misappropriation of city funds. Along with others, Anselm was interrogated. All of the men confessed under torture to stealing money from the treasury. 2 of them were stripped of their chattels and forced to move to a monastery. Anselm was forced to walk, unclothed except for his underwear, from banner to banner, barefooted and bareheaded, to beg the mercy of every dean of the city. He was also made to pay 4 times the amount he had admitted to stealing, and was barred from public office. With the death of his wife and his downfall in Bruges, Anselm returned to Scotland and became one of James III's close companions, being selected as keeper of the King's Palace at Linlithgow. Pilgrim. Anselm continued the family tradition of going on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. In the spring of 1470, after making confession and taking communion, he set off with a small group of companions who mounted their horses in front of Jerusalem in Bruges. They travelled through French Burgundy, stopping off in Pavia to pick up Anselm's eldest son on the way. Jan, who had been schooled from the age of 10 and studied at universities in Paris and Italy, kept a diary of the trip. In Rome, they sought an audience and blessing for their journey with Pope Paul II before departing to the Holy Land from the port of Genoa. The pilgrims stayed a while at the monastery of St. Catherine Sinai. Catherine was important to the Adornes family, and Jan referred to her as our patroness and advocate. The marble chest containing the head and body parts of the saint was opened, and the group was permitted to kiss the casket. Anselm was even allowed to stroke the body with jewellery and gifts intended for Charles the Bold and King James III. On his return, Anselm's standing in Bruges grew to even greater heights, and he was made a council governor as he went about rebuilding his father's chapel in the image of the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem. The exterior of the chapel has an octagonal tower and an onion-shaped dome that evokes the exotic architecture of the Middle East. The interior is packed full of symbolism and includes a representation of the cavalry with skulls and bones, stained glass windows, images of the Passion of Christ, extraordinary relics brought home from the Holy Land, and a crypt containing the replica tomb of Jesus. Anselm also added 6 almshouses to the estate for 12 poor women to live in, and extended and renovated the family home. The building was completed by the time of Anselm's death in 1483. Murder. North Berwick, Scotland, on a cold January morning. Mass had taken place and the guests were eating their breakfast in the monastery. A servant came running in with a message for one of the gentlemen. "Flee! Run!" was the cry. "Soldiers are coming!" Indeed, outside of the convent, around 200 armed men had gathered with spears and swords. But Anselm did not run away. Instead, he bravely walked outside to confront his aggressors. He was not even given the opportunity to speak before he was set upon, beaten, and stabbed. Wounded in the head, shoulder, and beneath his heart, Anselm lay dead. Still not satisfied with their handiwork, the mob ripped the chain from around his neck, the rings from his fingers, and even the coat from his back, made from the rich Flemish cloth that his home city was so famous for. It's unclear who gave the order for Anselm's assassination. He made a will just 3 months before his murder. Perhaps he had something to fear. King James was an unpopular ruler, and there was conflict between him and his brother Alexander Stuart, Earl of Albany, who tried to usurp the throne with the help of the English invading army in 1482. So the king and his favourites had plenty of enemies. After all, Anselm was a foreigner who had been knighted and awarded Scottish lands. Legacy. The historic and extraordinary Jerusalem Chapel still stands in Bruges, and along with the almshouses, they form a part of a museum that can be visited by the public. Amazingly, the Adornes estate is still in the hands of Anselm's descendants. Anselm's body was buried in Scotland, but his heart was taken back to Bruges and placed in his tomb, at the centre of the Jerusalem church, along with his wife Margaret, who had borne him 16 children. Good effort, but I can't help but feel sorry for her. There, Anselm is depicted wearing a chain around his neck with the Scottish symbol of the unicorn. There is a plaque in St. Michael's Church in Linlithgow, Scotland, close to the royal palace. It reads, quote, "Remember Anselm Adornes, merchant, diplomat, and friend of Scotland, ambassador of Charles, Duke of Burgundy, to the court of King James III, conservator of the privileges of merchants in Flanders. Born in Bruges 1424, killed in Scotland 1483, and buried near this place." Thank you so much for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please do subscribe if you're enjoying these videos, and I'll see you next week for another one. Until then, hope you have an awesome week. Cheers!